The wind sighs low across the buried ruins of Kutha, once called Kudiru of the Black Gate. Dust drapes everything here like a veil drawn over a corpse. You kneel, fingers brushing a shard of brittle clay, and it crumbles too ancient to bear the weight of memory. But within it, a whisper lingers. It begins, as always, with a name no tongue dares speak. Not in full, not aloud. Nergal, a syllable coiled like a serpent behind your teeth. The name itches in your mind, pressing forward, hungry to be remembered. But the texts say to speak it is to invite fever. To invoke it is to beckon plague. You're not the first to dig here. British explorers unearthed the Temple of Ameslam in 1881. Their journals scattered with half-translated cuneiform and sudden deaths. Fever struck the team within days, 3 dead by week's end. No bite marks, no wounds, only eyes dried in their sockets, and tongues blackened as if by soot. The expedition's lead, one Dr. Algernon Vesting, recorded a final cryptic note. The name is a gate. The god is the gatekeeper. He waits where the sun cannot follow, something underneath your memory. Others claim he was once a mere spirit of the noonday sun, who witnessed so much death at its peak, he transfigured into its avatar. And at the center, a shattered stone basin still blackened at its base, as if some fire eternal had once been housed there. The script glows faint, glows as you draw close, thickens behind your eyelids. Offerings had been made bones of goats, teeth of children, and lengths of braided human hair. Then his writing stopped, past the threshold into the remnants of Immersive. Burned walls, scorched columns, no roof, only sky. Etched on the northern altar is a symbol, an eye-weeping flame. Not Sumerian, not Akkadian. Forbidden, though no record dares say which city. Not Yor, not Nippur, something else. Something beneath. A whisper follows you down the crumbling stairwell, echoing through the ruins' hollow bones. It is not your name it calls, but something older. This ruin had been dedicated to the lord of the great city, and attempted to summon Nergal using fireless fire drawn from sulfur and lunar ash. According to the Ashur Codex, his mouth melted from within. The deeper you walk, the less light follows. No torch burns steady. The darkness here is not absence but presence. Some say Nergal was never a god, but an event, a collapse of spiritual order, a hole punched in divine law. A single tablet remains intact in the buried vault, half submerged in black sand. It is etched in ash instead of clay. Or was he, as one heretical fringe theory suggests, the very principle of entropy made worshipful, K given cognition? The translation incomplete reads, "When the gods fled from the darkness of man, one remained." He came from the south, clad in iron, wearing war as skin, and he was not called by name, for to name him was to summon the ending. No signature, no scribe's mark, only silence. But silence is sacred here. The 3rd century BCE, a priest from Kutha named Ishaku defied the temple's edict, the Codex, now lost. Described his death not as divine punishment, but communion. Old nuts. His bones were said to have turned inward, curling like roots toward the underworld. Modern scholars remain divided. Is Nergal a solar god degraded into a demon? Is he an underworld king bound in myth to balance out Ereshkigal? The whisper grows louder, not sound, not wind. It comes from within you. Memory or prophecy. You close your eyes, and in that black silence, you see a gate. A gate of iron, covered in ash. And from the other side, something breathes. The gate appears not in dreams, but in the hollow between breaths where memory frays and divinity sours. You see it again now, looming at the edge of myth and stone, wrapped in soot and ancient bronze. The 7-gated passage of Ereshkigal, where living kings dared never tread, but one god once stormed through. Nergal, they whispered then, not in prayer, but in fear. This was no descent by supplication. No respectful journey into the afterlife like Inanna's slow undressing at each threshold. No, this was invasion. The old scrolls speak of it obliquely in trembling phrases, the scorching one. He who takes without tasking the uninvited consort. In the myth preserved from Nippur's broken archives, Nergal is summoned to the court of Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, to offer tribute during a great celestial feast. But he disrespects her emissary. He fails to rise, fails to bow. He treats the underworld as one might treat dust on a sandal. At each gate, another piece of the living world is stripped away. But not from him, from the gate itself. So she demands retribution. A forgotten hymn, banned by Babylonian temple courts, described it as a consumption, as if she were devoured not in body, but in presence. She remained, yet not as she was. But he does not come with humility. He returns instead with plague winds and iron weapons, storming each of the 7 gates one by one, tearing through their guardians. They say death blinked first. Behind him, lions with eyeless sockets. For him, corpses that still walk. When he reached the final chamber, where no light dwells, Ereshkigal waited. Some versions call what followed a marriage, others call it conquest. Together they became rulers of the great below. Each gate required a name to surrender, a truth, a life. But when Nergal passed through, he offered none. It is said he carried no true name, only a mask of fire and a voice that did not echo. But in 1962, a sealed chamber unearthed in southern Iraq revealed a relief 7 arches descending into the earth, beneath the sun split in 2. The final arch, shattered, as if something had broken through from beneath, not by pact, but by imbalance. When heard knocking, the living must answer in silence. Any word spoken becomes binding. He had crossed into death and bent it. This act fractured the divine structure, a being whose domain is not just death, but the transition itself, the moment of expiration. The flicker before silence, the gap between soul and skin. Gods had roles, boundaries, domains. Or whether the myth is a veiled record of something that walked not symbolically, but literally into death and found no opposition. It involved the lighting of 7 oil lamps, each one extinguished by a whispered name. The final lamp must be blown out, not by breath, but by silence. Nergal defied his. He was sun and death, flame and rot, plague and sovereignty. His existence was an error the cosmos could not absorb, a paradox whispered only in secret. The sun entered the grave, and the grave bowed, temple reliefs later destroyed. Nergal is depicted holding a double-headed scepter, one end a flail, the other a scythe. For centuries, the cults of Cutha refused to depict him with a face. Instead, they carved his presence as a gap, an outline, a negative space amid flames. The ritual to pass the 7 gates was once known as Tul Nam Tor, the crossing of names. Even today, among the Yazidi of northern Mesopotamia, an old tale survives in buried dialect, a story of a door that opens not from this world but from the other side. And the door swings inward. Modern scholars dismiss this as folkloric bleed-through. What frightens archaeologists is not the age, but the freshness of the break. A ritual once performed to commemorate this event was known as Udu Nam Taru, the candle prayer of the sealed throat. Only then, they believed, could Nergal be kept from entering the body of the last speaker. The last known performance of the ritual took place in 1910. The officiant vanished. No trace. Only wax, teeth, and a gate drawn in blood on the floor. What remains unsettled among historians is whether Nergal's descent was mythological allegory for drought and disease. There are theories, unpublished, that speak of Nergal as an extra-dimensional threshold. And once, long ago, that gap opened wide enough for him to step through. The whisper returns. This time, it does not call, it waits. Heat presses against your skin, not from flame, but from memory itself. You stand before the broken altar of an Akkadian outpost, its foundation long devoured by sandstorms and centuries. A god who would never wear it, but who must be reminded about by mortal shape. The priests of Akkad named him Ereshkigal, and the scrolls no longer taught, meaning he who burns beneath. All that remains is a single iron diadem, half buried in clay, blackened by corrosion and crowned with thorns. It is said this crown was forged not for a king, but for a god. The fields blistered. Infants would not cry. They baked in their cradles. Temple scribes recorded that crows dropped dead in flight. It was not war that undid the empire, it was heat, plague, and silence. But its shape speaks a truer name, Nergal, Lord of the Scorching Flame. In the drought that withered Akkad in 2180 BCE, the rivers dried 2 veins of salt. It was him. To appease the unseen fury, King Dudu ordered the iron crown to be crafted. not as an offering, but a warning, a mark that even gods should fear men's desperation. Forged from scavenged spears and funeral nails, their crown's thorns point inward, designed to draw blood even from the immortal. A heretical ritual, the rite called for a living child to speak 7 names of fire in reverse, while the crown hovered over their head. It was never placed on a statue. There are no images of Nergal from that time, only empty plinths and burned mosaics. But the symbol carved next to that linen, inverted sun beneath, a mouthless face, matches inscriptions found in tombs far older, across Mesopotamia, Assyria, and the Levant. According to the secret dust ledger of Sipernau, housed in a private Istanbul collection, priests once used the crown during the trial of the nameless flame. A whole class of exorcists, known as refused to perform rituals of purification, claiming the corruption came not from men, but from the gods themselves. If the child survived without burning, they were said to be empty of Nergal. But still, the ground around that temple remains too hot for plant life. In it, a god of disease named declares heat that chooses. If not, the ashes were scattered across plague fields. It was this ritual that caused the Temple of the Burning Hour to be razed by imperial decree. The crown was buried beneath its ruins. They place it atop effigies meant to represent forgotten kings. But older practitioners know the true meaning. Not a symbol of monarchy, but a cage for the god of irreversible endings. Even today, only a spiral of scorched parchment remained on the floor and burned at its center. An obscure event recorded in the Obsidian Codex describes a spiritual collapse during the heat wave. Why a god of flame would fear the burn of his own memory. One priest wrote, "We can no longer drive the demons out, for the god who sends them has become the greater demon." Scholars debate whether this was hyperbole or political resistance. Always the same, always unsigned, a son without speech. Some believe the thorns of the Iron Crown were a coded representation of this silent siege point, marking an unspeakable truth. Modern esotericists theorize that Nergal represents a metaphysical principle, entropy wielded with intent, not decay through neglect, but willful collapse, fire that remembers. In 1931, a scholar named Gabriel Inshaw published a translation of a lesser-known Sumerian fragment called The Flame Beneath Time. I do not destroy, I complete. 2 months after its publication, Inshaw's study burned to the foundation. His body was never found. Even now, some ritualists recreate the crown of iron in miniature for solstice fire festivals. What remains uncertain, even among the most heretical traditions, is why Nergal had to be bound with fire. The thorns point inward after all. And you begin to wonder, did the ancients offer this iron not as tribute, but as a mirror? You reach into the dust and grasp the rusted diadem. For a moment it's cold, then pulse. Heat flashes in your fingers, then retreats like a frightened thing. The metal hisses softly in the silence. And beneath it, etched on the altar's buried side, you find a sentence long faded, but not erased. Do not crown him. He is already enthroned in bone. The whisper is behind your left ear now. Close, it does not speak, but you feel your blood warm. You descend through layers of time, each step stirring soot that has not known breath in centuries. Beneath the ziggurat of Uruk-the towering holy house, once raised to Ishtar herself, there lies a chamber the priest-kings swore had been sealed in the age before laws. Its bricks are blackened, its lintels sag, its air bites, and at its center, drawn in ash upon polished basalt, waits a symbol that should not be here. This was not made for love, nor war, nor celestial order. This is a temple within a temple wrought beneath the heart of Uruk, and this sigil, it's unrecorded in any official Babylonian liturgy, matches those found centuries earlier in the temples of Kutha. Those few fragments were copied under threat of death, often by scribes who later claimed to see worms in the sun. Madness followed, a single eye weeping fire, or perhaps more truthfully, it named itself with silence. Its acolytes wore robes stitched from plague shrouds. Their mouths were always sewn shut, save for the eldest among them, the ash-bearer, who alone could speak the final syllable of their god's name. This is not Ishtar's chamber. Not to bring messages, but to exchange them, one soul for another. one secret for one silence. The cult that gathered here was unnamed, but that it appears to have worked. That syllable was never written. It was wrapped in hair. At each point stood an oil lamp laced with blood. The priest in the center would whisper the final plague name while holding their breath. If they exhaled before the lamps dimmed, Namtar would know. The rite they practiced, called Zuda Namtarzi, or the opening of Namtarzi, was known only through heretical side tablets, banned from the Ereshkigal archives. Weeks later, the vault that housed it collapsed without cause. The scroll was lost. The ash symbol, however, has reappeared scratched into asylum walls, chalked into cellars. Why did Ishtar's priests allow it? Even etched into the margin of a 17th century French prayer book catalogued at the National de France. Others believe it was the heart of all worship. The hidden root from which all gods drew power, where Nergal was not condemned, but enthroned. An element. One to be stored and tapped. The rite was said to awaken the demon, Namtar, plague spirit and servant of Nergal, to act as intermediary between the living and the dead. Its central belief was simple and terrifying. Death does not listen, unless death is fed. To perform the ritual, a triangle of ash and crushed teeth was drawn on sanctified ground, a gate that opened downward, a god who did not blink, and he would answer instead. Few dared attempt it. But those who did, those few whose tongues survived, the flame spoke of a black sun rising beneath their feet. What horrifies scholars is not that this ritual existed. They claim it draws the eye away. When asked what they mean, they respond only with an old phrase. In 1854, a sealed cache of Sumerian ritual masks was discovered beneath Uruk, along with a scroll made not from papyrus, but from flattened, cured skin species unknown. The ink was not ink. You place your palm over the sigil, it is warm. And though the writing was damaged, a single legible line survived. He does not enter by invitation. He enters when remembered. Archaeologists cataloged the find, always the same eye, always weeping flame. What scholars still cannot agree upon is the theological mystery. How did the cult of a plague god survive within the spiritual capital of the goddess of order? Some suggest this chamber beneath the ziggurat was a heretical prison, sealed, hidden, rejected. There are signs the cult practiced necromantic theology, believing not that the dead moved on, but that they lingered by command. Death, they believed, was a resource, not ended. Fragment from the banned scroll of falling hours describes this sacrilege. We do not bury the dead. We plant them. Their roots shall bloom beneath the eye. Even now, in certain desert villages near the ruins of Uruk, elders still mark the first breath of a fevered child with a circle of ash. He is still hungry, and so you kneel beside the basalt floor, eye still glowing faintly. From within the stone, something breathes back. The whisper that has followed you grows fainter, not further, like something stepping into view. You remember the final syllable, but your breath catches. If you speak it, he might listen. But if you don't, you might already be here. In the dust-bleached plain where the city of Kutha once rose like a blister upon the world, two altars once stood so identical, so symmetrical, that the faithful claimed only the gods could tell them apart. One altar faced east and drank the light of dawn. Other faced west, where the sun sank red into death. At the height of Kutha's power, they were known simply as the Life Stone and the Rot Stone. Worshippers offered their prayers to both, never knowing which would answer. The east altar bore the sigil of Shamash, god of the righteous sun, divine judge, and radiant arbiter. The west bore none, no symbol, no inscription, only heat. Records speak of shared flames, twinned supplications, and offerings split evenly between gods that were not equal. Over time, the rites at each altar blurred. Then, one night, the Lifestone was found shattered. No theft, no quake, no fire, just dust and silence. They said the twin altars represented the balance of endings, the death that judges and the death that devours. That he had not merely absorbed the rites of his twin, but devoured them. The Shamash, god of balance and day, had been overthrown in secret, not by sword or rebellion, but by the reordering of flame. The remaining altar, once called the Rot Stone, was renamed Imeslam. house of the underworld flame, and all prayers turned westward. A few dared whisper that the god of the rotting altar had grown jealous. It bore only one phrase: "Why remembered badly? Why no twin?" And if the altars once served opposing deities, when did they become mirrors? A heretical tablet found in the southern ruins of Kish claims one was bronze, pristine, the other obsidian, blackened and chipped. Where light becomes too bright, the shadow eats first. The temple priests insisted the two altars had always served one god, Nergal, in his duality. Both heat and decay, judgment and annihilation. But scribes of Nippur rejected this. In sealed scrolls, they condemned Cutha's theology as abomination. They dressed the carrion god in daylight's robes. They offered joy unto entropy, made their tongues shrivel. It involved a votive, urn sealed with honey, ashes, and blood from an animal that had not yet died. A priest would whisper a curse into the urn before the final cut, binding the soul of the creature mid-transition. Yet the belief endured. The Extemelku, or Stone of Unseen Rule, was a third altar stone, rumored to lie beneath both shrines, never touched by daylight, carved in basalt, laced with bitumen. Others say it merely reminded him of what awaited the living. The god with no twin is all gods remembered badly. This phrasing, so strange, so personal, has baffled theological historians. The surface is scarred with heat stress, as if flame had danced there for centuries. You place your hand to the stone, but to trap him, a balancing act between life and rot, an anchor, prison. In 1919, during a brief excavation of Cutha's West Temple, researchers discovered two identical ceremonial knives buried together beneath the wrought stone. Both bore inscriptions: the bronze for the judge, the obsidian for the end. Like breath drawn through soil, the blades were found at the same depth, same position, same rite. But only the obsidian knife was warm. Forbidden practice known as Zalnam Teru once occurred at the rot-facing altar. The urn would then be buried near the altar's edge to keep Nergal fed. Some versions say this bound the god to the temple, ensuring he never left. Most chilling is the theological paradox that continues to haunt scholars. Why would a god of the underworld need offerings at two altars? Why not just one? One theory, rarely spoken aloud, suggests that the twin altars weren't built for Nergal. And when the life stone shattered, the balance broke, and he was free. You kneel now at the cracked foundation of the second altar. Down. It is cold, but underneath that coldness you feel hunger, a hollow, waiting. Then faint, almost imagined you. Hear a sound beneath the altar, a whisper that does not rise. It descends. The calendar ends, not in winter, not in war, but in heat. You sift through shattered fragments of a clay tablet excavated near Nippur, its edge still etched with the name of a forgotten scribe, Lugalazon, servant of the eclipsed sun. The markings are strange standard cuneiform at first, then nothing, an abrupt cessation, like a heartbeat stopped mid-beat. The date is 1741 BCE, and yet the next year in the archives is marked 1753. 12 years vanish. Not a ras devoured, no battles recorded, no king enthroned, no births or deaths, no celestial movements. All resume with vague phrases. The sun returned different. The river wept backward. The goddess slept. No names, no explanations. Only a pattern of gaps, just silence. As if the scribe's hand had been stayed by something unseen, or worse, something seen too clearly. This anomaly appears in 5 different temple archives across the Fertile Crescent. All skip the same span. Scholars call this the missing rain, but others whispers in smoke, footnotes in private collections, refer to it as the fastening of Nergal. In the Scroll of 9 Silences, priest writes, performed only when the sun reached its highest point. The rite demanded a black bowl be filled with blood and placed beneath a hanging stone. The priest would then rotate counterclockwise around the bowl 7 times, whispering the name of a king not yet born. The scribe who noted it drew a small symbol beside the phrase, a circle broken at the bottom, pierced by a descending line, as if history had been forcibly paused. The god of endings took not a year, but the breath between years. He chewed the moment that defines before and after. We lived forward, but our shadows walked backward. Crop patterns stuttered. Time felt warped. Does he also govern when death occurs? Their primary belief? Time is a wound and Nergal is the infection. It is not metaphor. During the drought years of the late 18th century BCE, astronomical records show that several cities across Mesopotamia reported solar anomalous eclipses that reversed mid-event, moon phases that cycled twice in a week. In the deepest parts of the astrological tablets of Enlil, there is a reference to a phenomenon known only as Etelem, EPPI, the calendar-esque convulsion. He who took the hour from my grandfather's life, lost records, fragmented timelines. But too many temples share the same absence. Too many stones echo the same strange line, and replaced it with stone. That same symbol appears carved into funerary stelae of the Order of the Pale Flame, a secretive group believed to have flourished briefly near Uruk. You find mention of a lost ritualistic Kumiko, or the cradling of the hourglass. At its center, etched into the stone, is that same circle pierced at the bottom. If the bowl boiled before the seventh turn, it meant Nergal had awakened from hunger. No record confirms the ritual's outcome, but in the year that ritual was supposedly performed, records of eclipses and famine ceased entirely. It raises the theological mystery that scholars dare not fully articulate. If Nergal governs death, not just endings, but the very idea of sequence? In this view, Nergal is not merely a destroyer, but a reordering force of being who edits divine narrative. Even the gods, it is whispered, once feared him not for what he did, but for what he might erase. A letter from a Babylonian priest to a rival in Assur reads, "You speak of Marduk, you offer grain to Shamash, but you forget the third fire, a name not found in formal pantheons, yet echoed in rural death chants, even into the early Christian era. First fire is life, second fire is judgment, third fire is memory unthreaded." Today, modern theologians have tried to dismiss the concept of the missing rain as clerical error. He came when the year forgot itself. You find yourself now before an abandoned sundial, its gnomon broken, its ring inverted. No moss grows here, no insect sings. Time, you feel, is still. You reach forward. And for a breath just, when you feel your hand tremble backward, the whisper does not follow. It proceeds. The parchment is brittle. The ink, if it is ink at all, shimmers faintly in the candlelight, like old blood refusing to fade. You turn the page with gloved hands, careful not to disturb the obsidian edge of the tablet beside it. But somewhere within the third year of the great drought, he began to speak of visions, of a sun beneath the sun, of a fire that had no source, yet cast no shadow. His sermons turned cryptic. His eyes bled when he blinked. That the words forming within him were no longer his own. That speech itself had become contagion. Script is angular, unfamiliar, etched not in Babylonian lines, but in a fractured glyphic style, long believed extinct. The name scrawled on the corner, barely legible, Ishnamu, high servant of the inner flame. He was once a respected priest in Sippar, a city of sun worship, devoted to Shamash the Lightbringer, the seer of truth. The text vibrates slightly, to the eye, never quite still. Linguists describe it as unstable script. Then he bit off his own tongue. Not in madness, but in sacrifice. According to recovered fragments of the Yamu scrolls, Ishnamu claimed his tongue had become a nest of Nergal. He sealed his mouth with molten bitumen. His final act before vanishing into the lower catacombs was to inscribe 7 obsidian tablets with jagged fingernails. Only 3 were recovered. Each bears a variation of the same phrase. He does not speak through voice, speaks through repetition. Or was he infected by a god whose presence is recursive, who does not arrive once, but returns through mimicry? These tablets glow faintly in low light and affect no material science as yet explained. The theological implications haunt every scholar who has studied them. In the Book of Bound Names, a Mandean manuscript never fully translated, the author speaks of a divine contagion of syllables. A sacred virus whose vector is language itself. Was Ishnamu possessed? Was he a prophet turned mad? One unsolved academic mystery surrounds the content of the final, unfinished tablet cut off mid-symbol. Mid-word, as though the scribe had been interrupted from within. Not written, but gouged. Scholars say the spiral's curvature matches patterns seen in fungal blooms and early Babylonian demon trap designs. Transliteration halts at a mask carved from volcanic glass was affixed to the lower face with burning pitch. The initiate would hum Never Speak 7 tones in ascending sequence, sealing each one with breath through the nostrils. If successful, it was said that the god would pass over the soul, mistaking silence for absence. Nergal Anch. Carved into the back wall, behind collapsed masonry, was a single glyph, an eye split in two by a vertical line. The final line scratches away violently, then descends into a spiral. But no one agrees on its purpose. It's not cut, dissolved. Some say it's a visual exorcism. Others think it's a warning. Don't finish the name. There are parallels in other texts. Say the name often enough, and it begins to say, you. Some suggest it was desperation light failing in drought, the darkness beckoning with answers. Just the end of it. Others believe Nergal lies at the heart of all suns. That heat pushed far enough ceases to reveal and begins to consume. Modern neurotheologians have pondered this. Could certain linguistic patterns act like spiritual parasites? Could divine names encode psychological fractures, opening the mind as one opens a door? Ishnamu believed so, and so he severed the door. A forbidden ritual associated with this belief emerged briefly during the later Seleucid period. Silent Taraku, the binding of the jaw. If failed, the initiate would glow from within. Their bones would hum. No one ever completed the rite twice. In 1997, a team excavating beneath Sippar uncovered a narrow chamber believed to be Ishnamu's final retreat. No writing, no signature, but the bones found in that chamber had no tongues. The mystery deepens. Why would a priest of Shamash, the god of illumination, fall under the sway of Nergal? There is an ancient theological question buried within this. Can a god of judgment become a god of entropy if the world no longer wants truth? You lean closer to the obsidian tablet. For a moment it hums, and in that moment, you forget your name. Not entirely, enough that you begin to wonder. Who is whispering through your breath? Smoke, not from incense, but from something old or ash that clings to the lungs and remembers breath it has already taken. You walk now across the bones of rebellion, though none who rose here were called rebels in their time. No tools shaped its walls. Only flame, only ritual. No, they were keepers. Preservers of an idea the world refused to recall, that death is not a punishment, but an empire. The Ash Temple was not made of stone. It was built of hardened, soot-layered offerings from 100,000 funeral fires. It rose in the southern deserts, far from imperial roads, beyond the reach of kings, and it was entirely dedicated to Nergal. But not as a god. Not exactly. The order that birthed the Ash Temple named themselves Children of the Third Silence. Their doctrine was dangerous, and it was whispered rather than taught. Instead, they wrote hymns and reverse palindromic invocations that ended before they began. In their theology, Nergal was not a deity to be worshipped, but a force to be acknowledged, the inevitable erosion of all divine order. Not the ruler of the dead, but the executor of gods. He was, they claimed, the end of worship itself. Their sacred symbol was a line of 7 dots carved into ash, always ending in a spiral. They wore no robes, no bells. Their heads were marked with funeral ash, and their mouths were never opened during rites. The central belief of the Ash Temple was chilling. The gods are mortal through memory. Nergal forgets them. The Children of the Third Silence swept through lesser temples, defacing not altars but divine names. Clay tablets were melted. The Ash Temple was found days later, intact, but filled with corpses arranged in concentric spirals. Statues' mouths were sealed with tar. Priests were not killed, they were unremembered. Names were stricken from lineage records. Graves were emptied. And so, they burned prayers, burned idols, burned scrolls. In flame, they believed, lay liberation. The sect rose quietly, too quietly. For years they spread through forgotten burial sites, ossuaries, unmarked graves, or become him. Being themselves of names, rituals, and history, they became vessels of his will, until at last they emerged from Ashnot to convert but to erase. The rebellion of the Black Veil began in 542 BCE. The rebellion lasted 9 weeks. It ended when the Grand Temple of Enlil Nippur collapsed in fire and explained, unnatural. At the center of the spiral, an empty circle. None were burned. None were bloodied. All had mouths filled with gray powder. Analysis later confirmed it was finally ground stone from temple tablets. They had swallowed the gods. The few texts salvaged from the site include the now-lost Scroll of Dimming, in which an unnamed priest writes, "We do not seek salvation. We seek amnesia. The gods can only return if remembered." This remains one of the great unsolved mysteries in theological studies. Was the Ash Temple trying to end Nergal? One interpretation posits that they sought to bring about an age without gods, in which all spiritual hierarchy crumbled, where even death was no longer feared because no one remained to fear it. Another theory, darker still, suggests they believed Nergal was already within them. Or did they believe in a future without gods, a future Nergal would bring, not as Lord, but his last breath? Even today, faint echoes of their practice linger. In a remote region of southern Iraq, villagers still mark newborns with a single ash dot on the forehead, accompanied by a phrase that has no known linguistic root. Lunar Suek. When asked, they say it means, "He won't see you yet." In 1986, a private researcher uncovered a series of carvings beneath the ruins of the Ash Temple, a progression of gods Ishtar, Malil, Marduk, each defaced, each reduced to dust. Not Nergal, absence, no image, no form, no crown. Just ash. The implications are theologically devastating. Did the Ash Temple truly worship Nergal? You sit now at the temple's threshold. The wind does not stir here. Even insects avoid the dust. You scoop a pinch of the gray soil and press it to your tongue. It tastes like silence. The whisper pauses. Then one word, no language, almost. There was no flame, no war, no lightning strike. And yet, the temple of Ina in Uruk burned. It is the year 1294 BCE. An eclipse has just swallowed the sky. Not a full eclipse, no, a false one. Recorded only in the marginalia of a priest's calendar, barely visible under faded ink, the sun darkened, then reversed, then screamed. You sit before the surviving remnants of the Ina stone annals, but there was no ignition, no enemy, no explanation, only heat, cracked, charred, uneven. The section where that eclipse was noted is warped by heat, as though the tablet itself had tried to remember too much. Not in Sumerian, not Akkadian. The language was unknown, but the name repeated was unmistakable. According to scattered accounts, the temple burned from within, starting at the sacred vault of Inanna, goddess of light, fertility, and cosmic descent. Only him. A single acolyte survived, found curled beneath a broken stair, eyes scorched white. She spoke for 1 hour and 7 minutes. Nergalu. Nergal. There. Then she expired, lips cracked in ash. The name had not been uttered in that temple for over a century. It had no place among the gods of love and war. Stone seals omitted his name. Ritual lists jumped from one deity to the next. A vacuum so total it echoed, and yet it arrived. What followed was silence, a deliberate silence. For nearly 4 centuries, no written record within Uruk so much as hinted at Nergal. You might not notice it unless you knew what to look for: the shadow of omission. It is not the absence of evidence, it is evidence of absence. It describes no ritual, no prophecy, just the silent migration of reverence from one god to another, unnoticed, irreversible. Theological scholars refer to this as the dark intermission. But in the soul of a temple, consuming divinity itself, a phrase changes, a name is swallowed, a torch does not dim. Then one day you're offering blood to the god of healing and realize he hasn't answered in years. The flame did not destroy the walls, it evaporated the godhood within them. A term that makes historians uncomfortable, but among esoteric circles, it is known by another name: the Midnight Sun. A belief that, Just once, for an instant longer than an instant, Nergal burned at night, not in the sky. A forbidden commentary recovered from the ruins of Babylon refers to a singular event, the moment when fire replaced prayer. When the spiral reverses when the sun burns downward, Ereshkigal is said to awaken. The book, banned and thought lost, was whispered to have caused blindness in those who read its middle chapter aloud. That is the terror of Nergal, not that he arrives loudly, but that worship slips toward him. No one admits where the phrase came from. It's not canonical, it's not liturgical. Slowly, heat gathers in the throat of a high priest, but something has. Even stranger is the eclipse itself. Astronomers cannot find a record of it in their cycles. No shadow should have fallen on that date. No celestial event could have caused it, unless it was not a shadow from above, but a flame from beneath. Certain fringe texts, like the inverted calendar of 9 tiers, time is portrayed not as a river, but a spiral of light and heat. No copies survive, yet fragments of its theology persist. In funeral rites among fringe Aramaic sects, the phrase Ashur Eli Ok Nergalu is sometimes intoned over the dead. The sun rises not for him, but it endures. It may be memory, it may be fear. And so, you sit beneath the broken arch of Ina's outer wall, your hands coated in soot, your tongue dry. You stare at a burned stone where a statue once stood, not even the base remains, and yet you feel it. Not presence, not absence, but replacement. Something else has taken the place of what once stood here. Not physically, not visibly, but spiritually. As if even gods can be overwritten. The whisper behind your ear is now a breath at your nape, and you realize midnight has no flame until it remembers the sun. There are songs older than language, songs sung in the throat, in blood, in the soft trembling of bone beneath skin. The Kaimel, or Hymn of Joining, is one of them. No official record survives. No melody has been preserved. And yet every few decades, it returns, scratched into walls, whispered during exorcisms, embedded in margins of unrelated texts. Its content, the union of death and death's queen. The hymn speaks of a literal binding, a moment in which two deities became something other. Something indivisible, not husband and wife, not king and queen, but the core of absence sealed together. Nergal and Ereshkigal, not a mythic metaphor, not symbolic union. A recovered fragment from 1892, since stolen from the Istanbul Museum archives read, "When the Lord of Noonflame met the queen below, he did not bow. He devoured her throne, and she fed him her name." Together they sang the hymn with no refrain. This version, found beneath a child's sarcophagus in Eridu, was not meant for public reading. It had been folded into the linen wrappings of the dead, hidden, preserved, cursed. The linguist who first translated IT Professor Alton Cressley died 2 weeks later, of fever, skin intact. Organs evaporated. His final note, scribbled in the margin of his working copy, read, "In some, he is seduced. In others, he seduces. In some, he seizes her throne by force." They weren't meant to unite. The hymn was a correction. This is the mystery. Nearly all surviving versions of the myth describe Nergal's descent to the underworld and his confrontation with Ereshkigal. But the Kimio describes something else entirely. A ritual. And the dead were said to stir just beneath the threshold of breath. On this day, acolytes of a forgotten sect known only as the Gilded Ashes would gather at riverbeds and chant the hymn backward, believing this inverted recitation sealed the gate between above and below. Fusion. A desperate effort by elder gods to fuse to unstable forces. The scorching entropy of Nergal. And the stagnant depth of Ereshkigal. Some say it marks the moment when the underworld ceased to be a place and became a functional law. A gravity, a gravitational pull on all divinity. One burns, one stills. That the underworld, once ruled by stasis and solemn silence, now pulses with heat, fire, and consumption. A cosmological accident. The scribe claimed to have found it during excavation in Nineveh, though no records support this. The hymn's closing lines were rendered thus: "A ceremony that should never have happened, perhaps, was never meant to happen, but did. One band commentary suggests the hymn was not a celebration, but a containment spell. Together, they cancel. Or, so the ancients hoped. The forbidden hymn was whispered only once a year during Salukatu, the day of closed mouths, when the sun was lowest the gate. They believed was the marriage itself. Theological dissenters argue bitterly over what the hymn implies. Others suggest something far worse, that the marriage bound Ereshkigal to Nergal's will, not a kingdom of the dead, furnace. In 1927, a partial transcription of the Kemel surfaced in a Parisian occult journal. We are no longer separate. We are no longer opposite. We are the hour that collapses the flame in the grave. Shortly after publication, the journal burned. No arson, no fault. Just combustion. The copy of the article, gone. But its cadence remains. You've heard it already, haven't you? Not with ears, with memory. With marrow. As you stand now within a tomb chamber carved in concentric circles, once thought to house high priestesses of Inanna, you see them? Burned sigils along the walls, interwoven glyphs of sun and gate, fire and womb, Nergal, Ereshkigal, but no line between them, just one spiral, one voice, one name. And in the center of the chamber, untouched by time or soot, a bowl of blackened glass still filled with ash. You lean close. It whispers the first line of a song with no refrain. There is a village that no longer exists. No map marks it, no census records it, but the earth remembers. You find it buried beneath the desert edge where once the Kutha River forked a place once called Eda Musar, the Garden of the Breathless. They did not bury their dead here. They listened to them. Archaeologists unearthed the site in 1934 after a sandstorm revealed skeletal outlines, curled beneath flat slate slabs. No coffins, no grave markers. It's only doors, rectangular stones placed above the dead as if sealing a room. And carved on each, the name Nergalu. Oral fragments recovered from the region describe a local belief that if Nergal's name was not etched into the stone above the dead, they would wait confused without guide or gatekeeper and claw their way back toward the world of heat and error. Not in reverence, in warning, the villagers, it seems, feared not death, but the return, a curse, perhaps, or a command. No record survives of when the village began this practice, but its last days are preserved burned into the wall of a sunken hut, where dozens of skulls were found, mouths still open, teeth blackened. The inscription reads, "They speak still, their breath rots the wind. They want their names forgotten. But he has taught us how to listen." Theological scholars debate the nature of this speech. Did the villagers hear voices? They hallucinate? It bore traces of both, yet twisted fuse with desert mysticism and what may have been fragments of the Lost Dust Creed. A system in which memory is the soul's true weight, and to speak is to bind. Or were the dead speaking in some unrecognized pattern wind against stones, ash drifting in spiral eddies, breath pressed through split reeds? On the seventh night after burial, family members would return to the grave with a jar of silt and honey, kneel, and whisper their own name into it. Then the jar was broken over the grave. More than one academic who studied the site began to suffer auditory hallucinations, whispering, chanting, always at dusk, never at dawn. The belief system was neither Sumerian nor Akkadian. In this belief, Nergal is not just the god of death, he is the god of reverberation. He does not take life. He leaves behind a voice that cannot stop. The villagers combated this with a ritual known as Ibushu Kar, or the silencing clay. By giving the dead a name to carry back with them, they believed Nergal would be confused that the voice echoing upward would no longer be the deceased, but the living within them. A theological switch, a spiritual decoy. But the practice failed, or stopped. It's close, yes. Resembles Nergal. Could be a variant, because the graves were found opened from the inside, not dug, not broken. The final entry ends in static. A low thrum. A single breath. Then the tape stops, unsealed. As though something had risen carefully. With purpose, no remains were missing. No fingerprints. But every body had turned over, every skull faced west, and and every hut had the same spiral carved onto its linteland, open eye above a broken mouth. What disturbs scholars most is that the word Nergalu, so confidently etched, so deeply feared, does not exist in any known Mesopotamian lexicon. But linguists insist it is not a name, not a key to enter, but a key to let out. It is a command, a phrase, a sound that, when spoken in the right cadence, in the right room, opens something. A Vatican ethnolinguist named Father Mino attempted to reconstruct the pronunciation in 1973. Audio recordings of his experiment exist only in fragments, disappeared the following morning. His study was found clean, impossibly clean, not empty, just untouched. Every object remained, but no scent, no dust. As if the room had been unlived. To this day, a small community of esoteric archivists believe that Nergalu is not a name, but a frequency, a key to the threshold Nergal guards. You stand now before one of those grave doors. You whisper nothing, and yet the stone grows warm. It's not with life, but with the memory of having been opened. The whisper returns, curling beneath your skull. It is not speaking. It is waiting for you to answer. It is said that death flies in circles. In the remote highlands near ancient Seleucia, long after the old gods were driven underground and their names forbidden, a shepherd found something strange in a cave choked with carrion birds, a scroll bound not in leather, but in the feathers of vultures stitched with threads of sinew, sealed with black wax and pressed with no mark. No one speaks of who wrote it. No one speaks of who buried it. But it was never meant to be read, and yet it was. The scroll, dubbed Parchment of the Black Horizon, contained no author's name, only a repeated phrase. Below the gods, below the dead, something watches. The writing is a radicline spiral inward instead of left to right, curling into an eye-like formation. At its center, a passage so chilling that its mere translation incited one translator to renounce all research into Mesopotamian theology. There is a king who rules no realm. His throne is the absence of thrones. His crown is the orbit of ash. And his name is never whole. This king is described not as a figure, but as a force, a sun that fell beneath the world and forgot to extinguish. Fire without flame, rule without domain, time without order. This is Nergal, not as plague god or warlord, but as something far worse, a subterranean sovereign enthroned beneath concepts, whose court is silence and whose messengers wear flesh like masks. Among the scroll, as most disturbing claims, is a litany of rituals designed not to summon Nergal but to confirm his presence. These include, if the air inside is warm, he has heard you. The offering of black breath, breathing into a sealed jar for 7 days, then unsealing it at midnight. If you see flames within the dark, he is awake beneath your vision. On the 8th morning, your reflection will return older. All different names, all same shape. The sevenfold descent, placing a mirror face down in a grave, then sleeping above it for 7 nights. The ashen eye test, dripping honey into your left eye while chanting Solgaletsu. None of these rituals invoke a spiritual parasite that adopted pantheonic skins as it moved. All of them reveal their diagnostic rites, ways to measure the infection of Nergal within the fabric of existence itself. What unnerves modern scholars is how consistent these rituals are with earlier, geographically distant practices, rites found in Canaanite burial traditions, Aramaic fever spells, and even pre-Zoroastrian fire cults in Persia. Spirals, inward suns, feathers. One fringe theory posits that Nergal was not originally Mesopotamian at all, but migrated more accurately, descended into Mesopotamian cosmology from an older pan-cultural source. The scroll makes a chilling theological assertion. Gods are born of belief, but he is born of absence. And the more they forget, the more of him there is. This line has prompted endless debate. What does it mean to be born of forgetting? Is Nergal a product of divine neglect? The residue of lapsed worship? A force that coagulates where reverence collapses? Some believe he is not the god of the underworld at all, but the god left behind when all others ascend. The scroll's final segment, tripped, half-missing, describes a vision. He walks without footsteps. He burns without flame. Where he passes, birds circle low. Their feathers fall like speech. and from their molt, scripture grows. He burned in his sleep. The feathers scattered across the floor and touched. Remember now how the scroll was bound? Not in parchment. Beneath the gods, beneath you, in feathers. The quill of the feather is slick, fresh, impossible. Vulture feathers. Each one inscribed with microscript. A single name repeated endlessly. Nergal. Written not with ink, but with something. Darker. Something that smelled of copper and smoke. The scroll has vanished. Last confirmed sighting. 1964. In the possession of a Russian occult archivist named Dmitry Belov. They could not be consumed. You find yourself holding a fragment now, though you do not recall reaching for it. But in its curvature, you read a new line, one not recorded in any translation. He is beneath the breath. The whisper returns, but now it has wings, and it is not whispering. It is waiting for you to sing. There is a monolith near ancient Ashur, rising like a buried tooth from the earth-black basalt. Windowless, seamless, uncut. No door, no gate, no visible point of entry. Something burned inside it. Early surveys revealed an intense heat signature trapped within, far beyond what desert exposure could explain. The stone itself, when tapped, rings hollow. But no crack, no seam, no mortal tool has breached it. And yet, excavated partially in 1938, the structure measures 13 cubits tall and 7 across, a number sacred to underworld rites. What the locals call it depends on the tongue, the echo stone, the ash gate, or most commonly, the temple that breathed. For in the right season, during the darkest moon, the stone exhales. Not air, it clings to skin, it stains breath. Once inhaled, it returns. Not immediately, but days later. The same sigil found in ruined temples, funerary urns, and fevered margins. Rising from your own mouth as if it had waited there, hidden, coiled, knowing you would speak again. As if the interior of the temple was not a room, but a timeline, compressing deaths into a singular spiritual pressure point. Human, twisted, arranged in spirals. Their mouths were filled with blackened wax. Ash. It seeps from the pores in the stone. Fine and warm, scented faintly of blood and cedar. A symbol is etched low into one side of the monolith, only visible when the stone is wet. A broken sun hovering over a closed mouth. Nergal's mark. No one recalls who built the temple. No stone records it. No era claims it. And yet beneath it, scorched bones have been found. The bones themselves tell a story. Carbon dating places them across centuries, over 1,000 years apart. Each year at the dark moon, they would gather around the monolith and chant backward in 7 voices, each holding a skull filled with coal. Theological speculation abounds. Some argue the monolith is a tomb, but no body lies within. Others call it a prison, but the most unsettling theory suggests it is a mouth. It's not metaphorical, literal. But this temple is full-scale, active. The equipment failed. All recordings were erased, overwritten by static. One thermal camera rebooted with a single image. A fixed point in the earth where a god may speak, whence if the pressure of remembrance grows too great. An old rite was once performed by nomadic death singers known as the Zisanam II, or echo weavers. But the expedition leader, Dr. M. Varnell, retired immediately after. When questioned, he wrote only, "If the air shifted. If the ash rose, if the monolith hummed, they would leave, immediately, silently." This was not communion, no opening. But you feel drawn forward, as if your bones recall something your mind does not. It was acknowledgement. They were not trying to reach Nergal. They were trying to remind him that they had not forgotten. Because the dead, they believed, demand memory, but he demands its erosion. There are unsettling similarities between this structure and the soul houses of ancient Egypt's mall votive models with sealed chambers meant to house the ka of the deceased. In 2009, a private expedition attempted thermal imaging of the monolith's interior. An eye, open, burning. It is still unclear whether this was a hardware glitch or something stranger. It wasn't looking at us. It was looking through us. It's waiting for us to forget our names. Stand before the monolith now, beneath the eclipsed old sky. There is no entrance. You press your ear against the stone, and hear not a voice, but a breath, long, slow. Inward you realize now, the temple does not contain Nergal. It is Nergal, not the whole of him, just a single inhalation, still waiting to finish. The scrolls were shelved in meticulous order, hundreds of them, many lost to history, others catalogued in obscure academic records but never studied. The Library of Adamatu was meant to be a sanctuary for forbidden knowledge, private collection of fringe theology and pre-Abrahamic sacramentalia. Hidden in the countryside outside Mosul, it burned in the winter of 1911. Not from flame, from absence. It began at the center and uncoiled like a snake of heatless light, stripping paper of meaning before it stripped it of mass. Some scrolls blackened, others dissolved. One book turned to dust before it touched the floor. Witnesses claimed the fire did not spread, did not consume, and one object survived untouched, a wax cylinder recorder belonging to Dr. Jeremiah Hall, the American scholar who had been cataloging a set of unnamed Akkadian fragments when the incident occurred. The fire left no scorch marks, only silence. No arson was suspected, no fuel found. On the cylinder, 6 minutes of breath, no words, just inhalation and exhalation, rhythmic, deliberate, until, at minute 6, a whisper. The page remembers, but the god reads back. The fragment Hall had been translating moments before the fire is now called the script of returning flame. Only a partial draft remains. Copied hastily by hand, it reads, "He was not summoned. He was not born. He is the fire that feeds on Scripture, the God who punishes memory." Theological debate around this phrase has never ended. What does it mean to punish memory? A monk named Father Gazwan claimed to have seen letters turn black before the parchment did, and reported a name spoken from nowhere. Does Nergal not feed on death but on recollection? Is that why his temples fall first in war? Why his name slips between tongues? Why even his statues are faceless, melted or unshaped? Because to remember him correctly is to be consumed. A phenomenon where text does not transmit knowledge, but summons the absence of it, a theological reversal, in which reading becomes prayer and understanding becomes invocation. Once it is spent, Nergal arrives to reclaim what memory cannot hold. The library fire was not the first of its kind. In 1783, a monastery near Aleppo recorded a similar event, an archive of apocryphal texts catching fire with no source, no embers, no temperature shift. Nergal, then his ears bled, died days later. Modern archivists call these events scriptural inversions. In some fringe seminaries, professors refer to this as the fire doctrine, the belief that divine knowledge is finite, and that every act of recording draws down that limit. In that belief, the God does not need followers. But at your feet, one scroll remains intact. Its enter scorched through, its center scorched through. He needs scribes. He needs you to write his name, to remember what has been erased, to stare too long into the missing page. The last written line in Hall's private notes, found unburned beneath his cot, states, "I no longer know what I am reading, but it knows me." You stand now among ashes and broken shelves. Nothing smells of smoke. Nothing stirs. You lift it. The parchment flakes. But beneath it, written into the wooden shelf, burned by nothing, are words that answer your unspoken thought. He has always read from the other side. The whisper now curls around you like smoke with no source. It doesn't speak, it reads. And you realize for the first time that you have become a sentence. And he is at the end. You descend now into the lowest vault of all, not a chamber, not a ruin, but the hollow at the root of belief. There are no walls here, no air. Only stone carved with 1,000 names, each etched by a hand that trembled. Each name once belonged to a god, the scourge under sky. Reshef, Era, Motu, Namtar, Shulmanu, the black flame, the third fire, all different, all dangerous. Often with similar attributes. Fire plagues silence the sun at its hottest, the underworld without passage. They map the names, trace the migrations, assign each one to a city, a cult, a coin. Scholars have long puzzled over the overlapping pantheons of the ancient Near. East gods of death and disease appearing again and again in different tongues. But none of them realize they are burying the same corpse over and over, not out of reverence, out of necessity. A whisper echoes through the vault, but not in your ears, in your name. You feel each title carved into the wall like a crack in the memory of the world. No language. Not just forgotten gods, but misremembered versions of one being, one presence too dangerous to name directly, too enduring, to erase, too vital to abandon. A being whose worship was not built in temples but in fear, whose rituals were not practiced but accidentally repeated. You reach out to a stone marked only with a spiral, yet the moment you touch it, heat blooms behind your eyes. And you know not through thought but through something more ancient, that this was his first name. A name never written because it was not a word, it was a forgetting. In the innermost chamber, beneath layers of scraped-off titles, you find a slab unmarked by any culture. No cuneiform, no language, just pressure. The surface is warm, as though the name itself is trapped beneath, still shifting, still breathing. And on the wall above it, scratched by hundreds of hands and hundreds of tongues, is one message, over and over. Do not dig deeper, but you already have. Because the final mystery is not who Nergal is. It is who he has always been. The God that bleeds through theology, that saturates the cracks, that returns not through ritual, but through confusion, when too many names overlap, when belief is worn thin, when altars are repurposed and languages forget how to close the gates they opened. He is the parasite of Pantheon, the God who remains when all others are misnamed, not worshipped, not summoned, inferred, and he is near. You place your hand upon the final slab. It is not cold, it is not warm, it is breathing. And for the first time, you do not hear the whisper. You are the whisper. It passes through you soft, slow, final. I was never gone. You just named me too many times and forgot which one I answered. The stone beneath your palm shifts, not by movement, by remembrance. He is not beneath the names, he is the names. All of them. And now, he waits for yours. So now you know. Or, rather, now you've begun to remember. The names carved in temple walls, the myths recited to ward off fever, the prayers stuttered over open graves, they were not history. They were containment. They were bindings, not blessings. You see it now? Nergal was never hidden. He was diffused, broken into aliases, folded into folklore, stitched into disease, flame, forgetfulness. Diluted, but dilution fails. You spoke the stories, you read the symbols, you let the whispers curl into your lungs. Across time, across centuries of dust and breath, the fragments have begun to reassemble not by faith, but by accumulation. And now he no longer waits behind language, he waits inside it. Inside your mind as it reaches back through everything you've just remembered. Inside syllables, inside script, he is not the God of death. Oh, he is the death of gods. And you have walked his archive. You've traced the spiral to its terminus. You've inhaled the name buried beneath all names. So the last question presses inward, not with urgency, but with inevitability. When you speak again, will it still be you who answers? If your candle hasn't gone out, then you're probably ready for the next God.